Picture this: a brand new $300 million tennis stadium built to be one of the crown jewels of the entire sport, and on opening day, barely 4,000 people bother to show up to watch it happen. That is exactly what greeted organizers at the Cincinnati Open this year, and for a tournament that had just poured enormous money into reinventing itself, that kind of silence should have been terrifying. Then something strange happened. One player walked onto the grounds, and within days, that same half-empty venue was drowning in flags, chants, and a waiting list of fans willing to pay absurd money just to get through the gates. This is the story of how a 21-year-old who has never won a Grand Slam somehow became more valuable to a tournament's box office than half the top 10 combined, and why the people running the WTA are quietly panicking about what that means for the future of their sport. Let's rewind a little, because to understand how strange this whole situation is, you need to understand what Cincinnati was supposed to be this year. For over a century, this tournament had been played on cramped, aging grounds, the kind of setup where players complained constantly about the heat, the lack of shade, and facilities that felt more like a regional club event than a top-tier stop on the calendar. So organizers decided to go all in. They spent roughly $260 million transforming the site, nearly doubling its footprint from about 20 acres to 40, and building a new show court that could seat over 11,000 fans, plus a secondary stadium holding around 5,000 more. On paper, it was a masterstroke. The rebuild event was even named Tournament of the Year by the Men's Tour after the renovation debuted. Ambitious lighting, wider concourses, more premium seating, everything a modern combined event needs to compete for eyeballs in a crowded sports calendar. And then the doors opened, and the seats stayed empty. Just over 4,000 fans wandered through a facility designed to comfortably hold triple that number on a single court alone. It's one thing to have modest crowds at a lower-tier event nobody expects much from. It's another thing entirely when you've just poured $250 million into your infrastructure, and the turnout looks like a Tuesday practice session. Part of the problem was brutally simple: the biggest stars weren't there to sell it. Novak Djokovic pulled out partway through, visibly struggling in oppressive Ohio humidity that reportedly hit numbers in mid-90s. Jannik Sinner withdrew with a knee issue before he could even get going. Carlos Alcaraz was still working his way back from a wrist injury, his participation uncertain right up until the US Open loomed on the horizon. Suddenly, the marquee names that usually anchor a tournament's ticket sales simply weren't walking onto those new courts, and Cincinnati was left staring at rows of unsold seats under a sun that made the whole experience miserable for anyone who did show up. Reports described fans collapsing from heat exposure, matches being interrupted, players retiring mid-match because conditions were simply unplayable, and people who had spent hundreds of dollars and driven hours to get there walking away furious. It was shaping up to be a public relations nightmare layered on top of a financial one. And then Alex Eala arrived. If you haven't been following women's tennis closely this season, you might not immediately recognize that name, and that's honestly part of what makes this story so remarkable. Eala is a 21-year-old from Quezon City in the Philippines, ranked outside the very top of the sport, someone who by traditional metrics shouldn't be capable of moving a single needle at a Masters-level event surrounded by Grand Slam champions. Yet everywhere she has played this year, something close to hysteria has followed her. It started building weeks earlier at the National Bank Open up in Toronto, where Eala's matches became the hottest ticket at the entire tournament. Fans who had never previously shown much interest in the sport started flooding in, waving Philippine flags, filling entire sections with a wall of red, white, and blue, and turning ordinary second-round matches into full-blown cultural celebrations. Tournament organizers were reportedly stunned when tickets for her early matches sold out in under half an hour, forcing them to move her off a modest court seating around 2,800 people and onto the main stadium court, which holds closer to 10,000. The tournament director in Toronto later admitted publicly that he had never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 have that kind of pull on an audience. By the time the event wrapped, Toronto had shattered its own attendance records, with reported figures north of 200,000 fans across the tournament, a surge widely credited to what people started calling the Eala effect. It didn't stop there. At the DC Open, Tournament officials said ticket inquiries specifically about her matches accounted for something like 80% of all requests coming through, an almost unbelievable share for a single player in a field packed with recognizable names. So when Eala showed up in Cincinnati just weeks later, the tournament that had been sitting on thousands of unsold seats suddenly had a lifeline, and organizers moved quickly to grab it. Reports indicated that her early round match had originally been scheduled for a smaller court, one that seats a few thousand, but ticket demand became so overwhelming that officials made the call to relocate the match to the biggest stadium on site. The fourth court, wherever it had been slated, simply could not physically hold the number of people trying to get in. One tournament director was quoted saying he had genuinely never witnessed anything like it. On the secondary resale market, prices for seats reportedly spiked to around $1,000, an extraordinary number for a match that, statistically speaking, didn't even feature the tournament's top seed. And according to organizers, roughly 80% of all ticket inquiries that week were people asking specifically when Eala was playing next. Think about that for a second. This is a tournament stacked with former major champions and some of the most recognizable names in the sport, and the overwhelming majority of fan interest was funneling toward one player who, by seeding alone, wasn't even supposed to be the headline act. So what exactly is driving this? The easiest explanation, and probably the correct one, is the sheer size and passion of the Filipino sporting diaspora. The Philippines has a population of well over 100 million people, with millions more living abroad across North America, and historically, tennis has never been a sport where that community had a global superstar to rally behind. Boxing had Manny Pacquiao for years. Basketball has a massive following domestically. But tennis, a sport dominated for decades by players from Europe and the Americas, never had that kind of representation on the biggest stages. Eala changes that equation entirely. She's young, she's charismatic, she plays with a kind of fearless, attacking style that's fun to watch even if you don't know the rules, and she's become something much bigger than an athlete to a community that has been waiting for exactly this moment. Fans aren't just showing up to watch a tennis match. They're showing up to witness a symbol of national pride competing on a stage that used to feel completely out of reach. That emotional weight explains why people are doing things that seem almost irrational from a pure economic standpoint. Reports from Cincinnati described fans driving 8 hours straight from Toronto just for another chance to see her play in person, essentially following her from tournament to tournament the way people follow a touring band. One group of friends reportedly planned an entire college reunion around a trip to watch her matches, choosing to reconnect not over a wedding or a holiday, but over a tennis event. When was the last time you heard something like that about a tennis player ranked outside the top 5 in the world? Inside the stadiums, the atmosphere has apparently been unlike anything organizers have experienced in years. Sections packed wall to wall with Philippine flags. Chants of her nickname rolling through the crowd between points. Fans erupting after routine winners the way you'd expect at a home crowd during a deciding set of a major final, not a midweek hard-court match. Eala herself has talked about how surreal the whole experience feels, saying at one point that even playing in the United States, once the Filipino fans show up, it starts to feel like she's back home competing in front of her own countrymen. She's used the phrase incredible to describe the reaction, and has said it makes her feel genuinely loved, and that it makes every match more exciting to step into. It's worth pausing here to note that other players on tour have started openly acknowledging what's happening, and not with resentment, which honestly says a lot. Jessica Pegula, one of the top-ranked players in the world, lost a final to Eala earlier this season, and afterwards spoke about the aftermath with a kind of amused disbelief, describing how her own podcast picked up thousands of new listeners literally overnight just from being connected to that match. She talked about fans still cheering for her even as she left the stadium as the losing finalist, saying there was just an overwhelming amount of excitement in the building regardless of the result. Coco Gauff, who has faced Eala twice this year, said something similar after a match in Toronto, essentially arguing that the entire tour should be embracing what Eala is bringing to the sport rather than treating it as some kind of anomaly, pointing out that the demographic she's attracting is genuinely important for tennis's growth, and that every player on tour benefits from a bigger, more engaged audience showing up to events. That's a notable thing for rivals to say publicly. It would be easy for established stars to view a rising player pulling this much attention as a threat to their own spotlight, but instead the reaction has largely been one of recognition that something bigger than individual rivalries is happening here. Now, let's talk about why this actually matters beyond just one exciting week of tennis in Ohio, because the implications go well beyond ticket sales at a single event. Professional tennis, and the WTA specifically, has quietly been dealing with an attendance problem across North America for a while now. Building brand new stadiums and expanding footprints is expensive, and it only pays off if people actually walk through the gates. Cincinnati's organizers didn't spend $260 million renovating their grounds because they expected 4,000 fans to show up on a given afternoon. They did it because they were betting on star power, on marquee matchups between recognizable names drawing consistent crowds match after match. When your top seeds are injured or absent, and your remaining draw doesn't have enough recognizable pull on its own, that entire financial bet starts to look shaky. What Eala has demonstrated across Washington, Toronto, and now Cincinnati is that there's an entirely different lever tournaments can pull, one that has almost nothing to do with traditional ranking prestige. It turns out a massive, passionate, previously underserved fan base can outdraw a stadium full of major champions if the right player representing that community is on the schedule. That's an enormous insight for tournament organizers, and it's one the WTA appears to be paying very close attention to now. There's a phrase that started circulating around the tour to describe all of this, the Eala effect, and it's increasingly being treated less like a nickname and more like an actual data point tournaments are factoring into their planning. Scheduling decisions, court assignments, promotional pushes, all of it seems to be shifting that in real time to account for the fact that wherever she plays, ticket demand spikes in a way that doesn't match her ranking on paper. And this raises a genuinely interesting question about the sport going forward. For years, tennis has operated on a fairly predictable model where attendance and broadcast interest track pretty closely with world ranking and Grand Slam pedigree. The bigger the name, the bigger the draw, more or less in that order. What's happening with Eala complicates formula in a way tennis hasn't really had to reckon with before, at least not at this scale. She's not the top-ranked player in the world. She hasn't won a major title yet. By the traditional metrics the sport has always used to measure a player's commercial value, she shouldn't be single-handedly rescuing a tournament's attendance numbers. And yet here we are, watching organizers scramble to move her matches to bigger courts because the demand physically won't fit anywhere smaller. It's worth stepping back and appreciating just how unusual her season has actually been on the court too, because none of this box office pull would matter if she weren't backing it up with genuinely compelling tennis. She's reportedly notched wins over 10 different top 10 opponents this year alone, an eye-catching number for a player of her age and ranking. She picked up her first WTA title. She pushed into the fourth round at Wimbledon, one of the deepest runs of her career on one of the sport's biggest stages. This isn't a case of a player generating hype purely off nationality or narrative while the results lag behind. She's actually winning matches against elite competition, which only adds fuel to the phenomenon, because fans aren't just showing up out of curiosity or cultural pride alone. They're showing up because there's a real chance they'll watch her upset someone ranked well above her. That combination, genuine competitive substance paired with an enormous, previously untapped fan base, is exactly the kind of thing that reshapes a sports business model over time. Think about what a similar dynamic did for other sports in the past. A single transcendent, culturally significant athlete can expand an entire fan base in ways that trickle down for years, bringing in sponsors, broadcast deals, and new markets that weren't previously being served. Tennis, historically, has had a fairly narrow demographic footprint in North America, and what's unfolding with Eala looks a lot like the early stages of that kind of expansion, a sport suddenly discovering an enormous audience it never fully knew existed, simply because there was finally a face on court that community could rally behind. Back in Cincinnati specifically, the human side of the story is honestly what makes it stick with you. Amanda Anisimova, ranked in the world's top 10 and someone who, on paper, should have enjoyed a comfortable home court advantage playing a lower-ranked opponent in the United States, openly acknowledged before their match that she expected the stadium to be packed, essentially conceding in advance that the crowd probably wouldn't be rooting for her. She said she figured it would be a lot of fun regardless, which is a pretty gracious way to handle a situation that, for most seeded players, would probably feel a little disorienting. Imagine being one of the best players in the world and walking into your own country's tournament knowing the crowd is going to belong to your opponent. That's a strange new reality top players are having to adjust to whenever Eala is on the draw sheet with them. And it's not just happening once. It followed her from Washington to Toronto to Cincinnati, 3 completely different cities, 3 completely different tournaments, and the same overwhelming wave of support each time. That kind of consistency is what separates a fluke moment from an actual movement. One sold-out crowd could be a coincidence, a lucky scheduling break, a local community turning out for a single event. 3 consecutive tournaments across multiple countries, each one seeing ticket prices spike, resale markets explode, and stadiums transform into what fans themselves have started calling a home away from home. That's not a coincidence anymore. That's a genuine shift in how a significant chunk of the sports audience engages with the tour. So, where does this leave the WTA moving forward? Organizers now have to grapple with a version of a very good problem to have. On one hand, they've discovered an entirely new, highly engaged audience willing to travel, pay premium prices, and fill stadiums even when the tournament's traditional headliners are absent or injured. On the other hand, that demand is currently concentrated around a single player who obviously cannot be at every tournament simultaneously. The challenge going forward is figuring out how to build on this moment rather than treating it as a one-off curiosity tied to one exceptional athlete's rise. That likely means more strategic scheduling to maximize her matches on show courts, more marketing built around reaching the communities she's activating, and probably a broader look at how the tour can identify and support other players who might be sitting on similarly underserved fan bases waiting for their own breakout moment. Because if there's one clear lesson from Cincinnati, Toronto, and Washington this season, it's that the traditional formula for what makes a player commercially valuable might be due for a serious rethink. Rankings and titles will always matter competitively, but what Eala has proven night after night, city after city, is that cultural connection can be just as powerful a draw, sometimes even more powerful than a number next to your name. $250 million stadium sat 2/3 empty until one player from Quezon City walked through the gates, and within days it felt less like Ohio and more like a home game in Manila. That's not just a nice story about a passionate fan base. That's a data point the entire sport is going to be studying for years. And it's fair to say the conversation around Alex Eala is really just getting started, because if this is what happens when she's still building toward her first Grand Slam title, it's genuinely exciting and maybe a little intimidating for the rest of the tour to imagine what happens the day she actually wins one.